He opened his door to help a stranger in distress. 1 month later, someone poured petrol through his mother's letterbox and set the house on fire. This is the story of how kindness became a death sentence. Today, we delve into a chilling case where a singular, selfless act of empathy was ruthlessly exploited and weaponized by a drug gang operating under a profoundly warped moral code, culminating in a tragic loss of 3 lives. Welcome to Curious and Spiritual, where we eschew exhaustive academic analysis for a direct engagement with the facts. Indeed, the more I uncover such narratives, the more profoundly I question the limits of human depravity. Our focus today will encompass the unfolding events, the subsequent police investigation, and the eventual trial. Within the distorted, self-aggrandizing hierarchy of St. Helens' illicit drug trade, Kevin Wheatman evidently harbored the self-perception of a visionary, perhaps a localized embodiment of Pablo Escobar. Yet, his ambition was fundamentally underpinned by a gravely warped logic and a strategic intellect as effective as a damp firework. To fully grasp the unfolding tragedy, one must first examine the preceding month, a period during which a straightforward act of human decency was meticulously weaponized by individuals utterly devoid of gratitude. This narrative doesn't commence with a spark, it begins, paradoxically, with a good deed. For in the inherently cynical realm of drug trafficking, an act of kindness is frequently nothing more than an unbilled debt, awaiting its grim invoice. On the 6th of June, 2025, along a canal path in St. Helens, George Jackson, the beloved son of Sheila and Eric, was drawn by desperate screams. He discovered Carly Maynard, Kevin Wheatman's ostensibly a trusted lieutenant, a designation that retrospectively highlights a profound absence of the professional competence she was supposed to possess. Maynard had just been taxed in the parlance of the drug underworld, a euphemism for being violently ambushed, beaten, and robbed of her supply by 3 users. George, displaying a profound empathy that would tragically precipitate his family's downfall, escorted the visibly distressed Maynard back to his mother's residence on South John Street. There, he offered her sustenance, allowed her to launder her clothes, and provided a secure refuge for 2 consecutive nights. Had this been a cinematic production, it would be the juncture where the criminal protagonist experiences a redemptive change of heart. In stark, unforgiving reality, Carly Maynard merely committed the address to memory, reporting it meticulously back to her employer, Kevin Wheatman. Kevin Wheatman, whose drug line reportedly generated a substantial £8,000 weekly from a compact, loyal clientele, had hitherto maintained a low enough profile to evade significant police scrutiny. He perceived George's compassionate act not as a gesture of goodwill, but as an exploitable business opportunity. Rather than dispatching a simple thank you note, he sent half an ounce of cocaine, with an estimated street value of £700, the underworld's cynical equivalent of a corporate signing bonus. Wheatman's ambition extended beyond mere friendship. He envisioned George as his St. Helens franchise manager, a respected local figure who could facilitate the distribution of his illicit product within the community. However, George Jackson harbored a fundamentally different ambition, a life free from the constant shadow of fear. He unequivocally declined that job offer not once, but twice. While in the conventional corporate sphere, a refusal prompts the recruiter to move on, within Wheatman's profoundly distorted war moral code, no constituted a grave personal affront. The gift of cocaine instantly transformed into an onerous debt. Wheatman aggressively pursued repayment. When the money failed to materialize, Wheatman, prioritizing his perceived loss of face over a human life, began to assemble a strike team, comprising Lee Owens and Paul Smith, more commonly known as SMIG. The team Wheatman assembled was, by no stretch of the imagination, professionally competent. Instead, they were individuals propelled by drug-induced desperation. The ensuing court proceedings would later unveil a crucial detail. Stripping away any lingering tough guy facade, Wheatman had coerced Paul Smith into committing the arson by exploiting his drug debts. This was no mission amongst brothers in arms, but rather a horrific undertaking by terrified, manipulated addicts. Wheatman's leadership style was predicated entirely on instilling fear and employing violence, tactics he wielded with chilling ease. Indeed, Wheatman was far more than a mere drug dealer. At the tender age of 15, he had already left a police officer with permanent brain damage after deliberately running them down on a scooter. This act, committed long before the events in question, firmly established his ruthless war moral code. Just after midnight on the 15th of July, 2025, the sinister plan transitioned from a theoretical concept to a terrifying reality. While George Jackson was out visiting a friend, leaving his 83-year-old mother, Sheila, and 77-year-old stepfather, Eric, at home, Owens and Smith arrived on a motorbike. Their objective was not confrontation, but a cowardly, destructive exit. Accelerant was deliberately splashed onto the UPVC door, a material that, upon ignition, liquefies and emits a dense, toxic black smoke akin to a chemical weapon. A naked flame was then applied, instantly transforming the house on South John Street into a deadly inferno. The fire spread with terrifying speed, engulfing the staircase and filling the bedrooms where Sheila and Eric, the elderly couple cherished as the glue of the family, lay sleeping. As they struggled desperately for breath, Smith and Owens were already speeding away. While they successfully instilled terror, their actions simultaneously sealed their own fates. In attempting to merely scare George, they had committed a capital offense against some of the town's most vulnerable residents. As plumes of smoke ascended over St. Helens, emergency services arrived to confront a scene of utter devastation. Sheila and Eric were valiantly rescued from the blaze, but their condition was critical. Rushed to hospital with life-altering injuries, both tragically succumbed to their wounds later that same day. Not long thereafter, one of the arsonists began to confront a nightmare of his own terrible creation. For Paul Smith, the fleeting adrenaline of the crime dissipated instantly, supplanted by a crushing, soul-destroying regret. While Wheatman remained arrogantly indifferent to the sickening disaster he had orchestrated, Smith commenced a profound physical and mental unraveling. Over the subsequent 7 days, Smith became a mere spectre in his own existence. He sought solace with his partner, not as a triumphant participant, but as a shattered man. He didn't boast, he wept. He confessed to having killed 2 people and that they were the wrong ones. He was a man tormented, caught between the spectre of a lifetime prison sentence and the paralyzing fear of the individual who had coerced him into the heinous act. On the 22nd of July, 2025, precisely 1 week following the fire, Paul Smith was discovered dead at a property in Everton. While the official circumstances of his death were not publicly disclosed, whether he sought to silence the tormenting screams in his mind or deliberately evade the dock, Smith's demise added a final, grim layer to the unfolding chaos. He had been the one to physically ignite the flames, and ultimately, that same fire consumed him too. In the immediate aftermath of the South John Street inferno, the Wheatman drug syndicate likely settled into a false sense of security, exhibiting the misplaced confidence of those who erroneously believe a figurative helmet renders them invisible to the law. Kevin Wheatman, the architect of this catastrophic enterprise, seemingly labored under the profound delusion that Merseyside police were still employing magnifying glasses and crude sketches for their investigations. He was, as detectives would very soon prove, tragically, fundamentally mistaken. The investigation into the tragic deaths of Sheila Jackson and Eric Greener was nothing short of clinical, a high-tech forensic examination of a criminal conspiracy that left more digital footprints than a bored teenager on a social media marathon. The police didn't commence with a whodunits inquiry. The suspects had, in essence, signed their names in petrol. Their starting point was irrefutable data. While Sheila and Eric were being mourned by a town that regarded them as local royalty, the Northwest Regional Organized Crime Unit, NROCU, was meticulously unpicking Wheatman's logistical network. They initiated a CCTV sweep so exhaustive it could have precisely mapped the entire traffic flow of St. Helens. The seemingly stealthy getaway of Lee Owens and Paul Smith on their motorbike was captured by dozens of cameras, providing a high-definition itinerary of their journey from the planning stages right up to the moment they poured accelerant through the letterbox. Attempting to commit a capital crime on a noisy motorbike in a densely populated residential area is, quite simply, offering law enforcement a GPS-guided tour of one's own profound idiocy. However, the true gold in the investigation was unearthed from the airwaves. Kevin Wheatman, with a staggering lack of foresight, was attempting to simultaneously manage the aftermath of a double homicide and coordinate the daily operations of his £8,000 a week drug line. Each flare message, a mass text advertising his latest Class A inventory to his customer base, effectively pinged his precise location to the nearest cell tower. Detectives uncovered a flurry of incriminating communications between Wheatman, Carly Maynard, and the arsonists in the minutes immediately surrounding the fire. It formed a meticulous digital breadcrumb trail, unequivocally demonstrating that the mastermind was not merely a distant observer, but an active conductor, orchestrating events even as the house burned. The investigation subsequently took a truly surreal turn, starkly illuminating the utterly depraved war moral code that the judge would later find so profoundly disturbing. As the victim's family grappled with an indescribable loss, Kevin Wheatman evidently concluded that the optimal way to process the previous night's activities was through a spot of retail therapy. On the 16th of July, less than 24 hours after commissioning the arson, Wheatman was captured on CCTV at Cheshire Oaks Designer Outlet. The footage did not depict a man haunted by the screams of pensioners. Instead, it showed him nonchalantly browsing for designer apparel, selecting a new outfit with the same superficial emotional detachment one might employ when choosing a sandwich. This particular piece of evidence would become a crucial cornerstone of the prosecution's case, serving as a vivid, chilling illustration of a man for whom human life held no more value than a fresh pair of trainers. As the weight of physical evidence grew, the human component of the criminal enterprise began to fracture under the sheer magnitude of the tragedy. Paul Smith, the individual who had physically ignited the fatal flames, was the first to psychologically disintegrate. While Wheatman indulged in retail therapy at Cheshire Oaks, Smith was engulfed in profound distress, reacting as any man possessing a remnant of conscience might. He utterly broke down. He didn't merely confess, he spiraled into an abyss of guilt. When Smith was discovered dead on July 22, precisely 1 week after the fire, the police did not simply lose a suspect, they acquired a ghost witness. Smith's partner's subsequent testimony, profoundly influenced by Smith's overwhelming guilt, furnished the internal narrative that CCTV cameras could never capture. She recounted to detectives the terrifying pressure Wheatman had exerted to ensure the attack proceeded. Then, the investigation unveiled a chilling trophy. When police raided the home of Carly Maynard, the very trusted lieutenant who had been offered sustenance and shelter by George Jackson in her desperate hour, they uncovered a morbid memento on her phone, a saved video of Sheila and Eric's funeral. This was not filed for remembrance, it was an additional notch on her metaphorical bedpost, a grim confirmation that the heinous task Wheatman had ordered had been successfully executed. This discovery unequivocally dismantled any lingering defense that Maynard was merely a passive participant. She was the one who supplied the address, who actively facilitated the betrayal, and who retained a video of the funeral as if it were a highlight reel from a Saturday night out. The forensic team additionally recovered a pivotal recording from Wheatman's own digital archive, destined to seal his fate. It served as the unequivocal smoking gun of his murderous intent, a clear, audible threat made a month prior to the fire, wherein Wheatman explicitly voiced his desire to burn out George and his mother. This was far from mere bravado, it was a premeditated blueprint. It transformed the defense's potential argument that the act was merely intended as a scare into a laughable fabrication. The police had irrefutable evidence of intent, coordination, the damning CCTV footage of the shopping trip, and the posthumous confession of a deceased man. By the time the trio were brought in for questioning in late July, the investigation was so meticulously constructed, it was effectively vacuum-sealed. Wheatman, Maynard, and Owen sat in their respective interview rooms, obstinately adhering to a no-comment strategy that increasingly resembled an futile attempt to stem an overwhelming tide with a plastic bucket. They remained blissfully unaware that the police had no need for their testimonies. Their phones, the omnipresent cameras of Cheshire Oaks, and the spectral testimony of Paul Smith had already meticulously recounted the entire tragic story. The case had transitioned beyond the question of if they had committed the acts, to merely anticipating how a jury would react to the sheer, callous stupidity of their actions. As the investigation seamlessly transitioned into a formal prosecution, the trio remained in custody, seemingly convinced that their illicit reputations might somehow shield them from the inevitable. The detectives had expertly fulfilled their mandate, transforming a horrific, smoke-filled tragedy into an irrefutable mountain of data, all pointing to a singular, inescapable conclusion. The stage was finally set for the trial at Liverpool Crown Court. The 5-week trial, commencing in February 2026 at Liverpool Crown Court, transcended a mere legal proceeding. It served as a profound case study into the very nadir of human character. While the prosecution meticulously presented a case constructed from digital certainty and heartbreaking testimony, the defendants, Kevin Wheatman, Carly Maynard, and Lee Owens, appeared to regard the proceedings as a light-hearted social event, rather than a double murder trial. It was within this hallowed space that the gang's war moral code finally collided with a reality utterly indifferent to their efface among criminal associates or the turnover of their drug line. The courtroom atmosphere was one of oppressive, suffocating grief, starkly punctuated by the jarring, high-pitched arrogance emanating from the dock. In one corner sat the grieving family of Sheila Jackson and Eric Greener, individuals who had dedicated their lives to fostering a community of love in St. Helens. In the opposing corner sat Kevin Wheatman, a man of uniquely destructive tendencies, who had extinguished lives for the sake of a paltry £700 drug debt. The evidence subsequently presented constituted a masterclass in modern detective work. Jurors were shown the chilling footage from Wheatman's shopping trip at Cheshire Oaks, depicting him nonchalantly seeking new apparel whilst the ash was still settling on the victim's charred possessions. They witnessed the burnout recording, capturing Wheatman's cold, unmistakable intent in his own voice. They viewed the morbid, trophy video of the funeral, discovered on Carly Maynard's phone. The prosecution not only proved their guilt, they demonstrated a moral vacuity shallower than a child's paddling pool. Yet, the most haunting presence in the courtroom was that of a man who was conspicuously absent, Paul Smith. His partner bravely took the stand, delivering his confession from beyond the grave. She vividly described a man utterly broken, one who knew he had irrevocably traded his soul for a drug dealer's transient approval. Through her testimony, the jury understood that Wheatman had been the tyrannical hand on the throat of everyone involved, mercilessly employing fear to ensure the fatal match was struck, a pattern of behavior that would come to define the trial in the public consciousness. As the most harrowing details of Sheila and Eric's final moments were meticulously recounted, Kevin Wheatman and Lee Owens were repeatedly observed smirking, whispering to one another, and openly laughing. It was a display of such profound disrespect and chilling indifference that it felt like a secondary assault upon the grieving family. When the exasperated judge finally intervened and challenged Wheatman's abhorrent conduct, this architect of disastrous decisions offered a defense as pathetic as it was revealing. He claimed, with an unnerving straight face, that he was not laughing at the victims. No, he informed the court. "I'm always laughing. I'm a happy person." It was an astonishing declaration from a man whose happiness had culminated in 2 funerals and the death of an accomplice. He evidently believed that presenting himself as a jolly fellow constituted a valid legal defense for ordering a double incineration. Carly Maynard, meanwhile, attempted a distinctly different tactic, that of the innocent bystander. She endeavored to portray herself as a woman helplessly caught in a maelstrom beyond her control. This defense, however, disintegrated the moment the jury recalled that she was the very individual who had been shown kindness and sustained by the victims, only to then provide the address for their ultimate destruction. One cannot credibly claim victimhood when they have provided the very map to the crime scene. As the trial approached its conclusion, the focus irrevocably returned to where it ought to have been throughout: Sheila and Eric. The victim impact statement served as a devastating reminder of the profound loss inflicted upon St. Helens. These were not mere names within a courtroom, they were a couple who had shared decades of their lives, functioning as the vital glue of a large, heartbroken family. Eric was universally known as a man who would readily assist his neighbors in any way he could. Sheila presided over a home that served as a sanctuary for all, including, for a brief and ultimately tragic period, the very woman who had been robbed, beaten, and then so callously betrayed her. Their family articulated the unbearable void left in their wake, demonstrating to the court that while Wheatman had succeeded in burning down their house, he had utterly failed to diminish the enduring love they held for one another. This love was a currency Wheatman neither understood nor, consequently, could ever tax. The final reckoning arrived on Tuesday the 17th of February, 2026. The jury at Liverpool Crown Court formally acquitted Kevin Wheatman, Carly Maynard, and Lee Owens of murder. Instead, they were convicted of manslaughter. For the family seated in the gallery, this distinction likely felt like a cold legal technicality, failing to encapsulate the immense magnitude of their loss. However, the verdict was a direct consequence of the stringent burden of proof mandated for a murder conviction under UK law. The judge, in his sentencing remarks, was meticulously clinical. He meticulously detailed Wheatman's depraved war moral code and underscored the extreme callousness evinced by the shopping trip and the funeral video. He observed that while Wheatman purported to be a happy person, his actions had, in reality, brought nothing but profound misery to every life he touched. Kevin Wheatman, aged 34, was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years for manslaughter and drug conspiracy. Lee Owens, 46, received a sentence of 13 years and 6 months for manslaughter. Carly Maynard, 37, was sentenced to 23 years for drug conspiracy and manslaughter. As they were escorted to the cells, their brazen laughter had finally ceased. They left behind a courtroom filled with the tears of a family who had, at last, witnessed a measure of justice, and a town that would forever cherish the memory of the King and Queen of South John Street. This gang of callous individuals, far from proving themselves the bosses of St. Helens, merely cemented their status as a tragic footnote in a larger narrative about the enduring, indomitable power of a family's love. At the very core of this harrowing case resides a terrifying paradox. George Jackson's profoundest virtue ultimately became his family's most grievous vulnerability. In an era often characterized by escalating isolation, George exemplified the radical empathy we are inherently taught to admire. He encountered a person in acute distress and unhesitatingly opened his door. The chilling irony that his very threshold was then weaponized to trap his mother and stepfather is a bitter truth for any society to confront. It compels us to pose a question we typically prefer to circumvent. In a world increasingly governed by such brutal war moral codes, does kindness itself now constitute a liability? I must confess, this particular case has resonated deeply with me. Not merely for the innocent lives tragically impacted, but for the incandescent rage I feel towards the utter morons whose sole response to such atrocities is a self-serving "as long as I get paid" Perhaps it is merely my perception, but I often feel surrounded in real life by these ring pieces. Yet, if a sense of shock and anger can still be elicited, then all hope is not yet lost. Personally, I believe they ought to have been convicted of murder. However, in this country, a murder conviction often seems to necessitate one standing over a body with a knife, saying, "I killed you, you uffer." I've been planning this for ages. Anyway, I find myself straying into personal indignation. Sheila and Eric were laid to rest with the dignity they so richly deserved, whilst those who sought to consume them in flames were relegated to the desolate silence of a prison cell, where the only laughter left is at the wreckage of their own wasted lives.